And now, the Asiana plane crash. So was it pilot error, mechanical failure? What was it? Federal investigators are trying to quickly determine why the South Korean airliner flying 307 people hit a seawall as it approached the runway in San Francisco Saturday. I want to emphasize, by the way, for those of you who haven't heard of this airline, it had won many awards for its service and its quality. This was not a run-of-the-random airline, fly-by-night. This was a very serious and respected airline. The impact ripped the tail off the jet, sent the plane skidding across the runway before it burst into flames. The National Transportation Safety Board says the plane was flying more than 30 miles an hour slower than it should have been as it approached landing.
About 3 seconds prior to impact, the flight data recorder recorded its lowest speed of 103 knots. At this time, the engines were at about 50% power, and engine power was increasing. At impact, airspeed was approximately 106 knots.
All right, that's about 121 miles an hour at impact. We also know the pilot was making his first landing in a 777 at the San Francisco airport. But did that lead to the crash in which so many were injured and 2 died? Captain Mark Weiss flew a 777 for a year with American Airlines, and he's out front tonight. And Captain Weiss, I mean, the pilot of this plane had more than 10,000 hours flying airplanes. He clearly was an experienced pilot, but only 43 hours of experience flying a 777. Just so people know, it's about an 11 and a half hour flight from Seoul to San Francisco. So he had never landed a 777 at this airport. How significant is his limited flight time in control of the 777 to this case?
Well, certainly the NTSB is going to look at that as a factor, a contributing factor. But in reality, changing aircraft is something you do all the time in the aviation industry. Your pay is based on it. Your seniority will give you opportunities to fly bigger aircraft over longer routes. So it's not as a significant factor as I think you might believe it to be.
No, that's interesting, because I mean, a lot of people have honed in on that as well. Maybe, he just didn't have the feel of the plane. He didn't know certain things. And to that end, Captain Weiss, let me ask you about this, because federal investigators have honed in on one thing specifically, and that is how slow this plane approached, way too slowly. Recommended speed at landing 157 miles an hour. At the point of impact, this Asiana plane was flying 121 miles an hour. Now, I would imagine, and tell me if I'm wrong, that every pilot would know the speed when you're landing that would actually cause a stall. Is there any way that they wouldn't have known and been in their own head before any warning signal saying this is just way too slow? What are we doing?
Well, you've touched on a perfect point. Everybody should have been aware. It's a very critical time, and everybody has a very high concentration to make sure everything is going right according to a scenario that you've trained for hundreds of times and done 1,000 different landings. There was a loss of situational awareness on the part of, it seems like, the entire crew to allow that aircraft to get into a position where it was stalling. And that's something that you learn from day one, not to allow it to happen.
And we understand, and again, I know the situation is fluid, but that they tried to abort the landing about a second and a half before landing as they realized they might stall. Is there any way that you would ever be able to abort a landing when you are 1.5 seconds away from impact? I mean, it would seem to me that the die's already cast, isn't it?
Well, maybe the way to really couch that would be you can make that a aborted landing and continue on a missed approach even if you've actually touched down on a runway. And we do train for that. But they did not have the airspeed or the altitude to permit that to happen. And a chain of events lead to an accident, no one incident. It takes between 7 and 9 seconds for an engine to go from idle to power that you need. And if they've called for go-around thrust or more power to be added, they only added that about 7 seconds or so before the impact. Had they added that maybe double that amount of time, or 15 or 20 seconds earlier, they may have been able to do a go-around, or at least not bring the airplane to a point where it stalled and where it was in a nose-high attitude where the tail hit the seawall.
All right, Captain Weiss, thank you very much. We appreciate your perspective. Captain Weiss, as we said, flew a 777 for more than a year for American Airlines. Well, you know, one of the questions here was how people landed, how they were sitting in their seats. You've heard about so many of the injuries being back injuries, spinal injuries of compression. So do you know how to survive a crash at landing? 305 people made it out alive on Saturday. It's a miraculous turn, and 6 people remain in critical condition, so there are those still fighting for their lives. But investigators say survival is not as uncommon as most people think. Brian Todd is out front with that part of the story.
Oh my God. It looks unsurvivable, yet almost everyone did survive.
I feel very lucky and blessed that we were able to get those people out in that time.
The lesson, according to experts, you can make it out of even a horrific crash alive. Part of the NTSB's elite GO team of investigators sent to San Francisco is a group looking at how people survive plane crashes.
And this is all about impact. This is all about kind of blunt force, G-force.
We got exclusive access to their training center in 2009 and spoke to Nora Marshall, who led the Human Performance and Survival Factors Division of the NTSB.
Tell me about the myth and about how you want to dispel it.
Well, one of the myths is that if you're involved in an airplane accident, you're not going to survive. And we know that's not true.
These days, one key reason you can make it out, equipment enhancements.
We've improved the chance of survival by improving seat strength, by building airplanes that can withstand crash forces.
Take a look at the inside of the Asiana plane. Even the damaged seats could have protected passengers. Another example, Little Rock, June 1999. Landing in a thunderstorm, American Airlines Flight 1420 slides off the runway, impacts a light structure, splits open, fire breaks out in the aft section. But look at the seats. With the fuselage breached, much of the cabin destroyed, many of the seats remain relatively intact, even some that were ripped out by impact. Here's one survivor's account.
There was a gap in the side of the fuselage, a big old gash. Outside of that, I found 2 people still strapped in their chair that had apparently been thrown through that. They were both alive and doing okay.
Hard landings, such as this 2002 Iberia Airlines emergency touchdown at JFK, are completely survivable, Marshall says.
Stay calm.
Crucial to survival, human behavior. Flight crews are better trained than ever to get people out. Marshall pointed to the 2005 overrun of an Air France jet in Toronto and the Hudson River landing. Number of people killed in those incidents? 0. But she says passengers still need to be sharper in the cabin. The former flight attendant took me through an evacuation drill.
Release seatbelts. Get out. Why are you blocking the aisle to get your carry-on? Leave it behind. Okay, your closest exit, right here.
So 2 things I went the wrong way.
How do you open that? Okay, did you look at your briefing card? Do you know how the exit opens?
I don't know.
Did you know there was an exit right behind you?
Nope.
In about 20 seconds, I made 3 very common mistakes that could get me and others killed. But many passengers do get it. In Little Rock, 134 out of the 145 people on board survived, including one man who scrambled out with the seat still on his back.
He crawled away from the airplane, and it wasn't until he got to this area that he realized he hadn't even unfastened his seatbelt.
Marshall said when your plane is taking off and when it's landing, those are the 2 times you should have your seatbelt buckled tightly. She says if you do that and there's an impact on takeoff or landing, having it belted tightly will not only keep you from being thrown around, but the seat absorbs much of the energy of the impact. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
Well, minutes after Asiana's Flight 214 crashed, first responders and emergency personnel rushed to help, and they saved a lot of lives. But it was a chaotic scene that may have led to a tragic accident. Kyung La is out front.
Oh, my God.
Moments after Asiana Flight 214 crashed, hundreds of emergency rescuers rushed to the scene. More than 300 passengers and crew running, some pulled from the wreckage, many of them severely injured. Somehow in that chaos, a terrible collision. One of the 2 16-year-old girls killed, struck by the very rescuers trying to save her.
I became aware to one of our fire attack battalion chiefs that there was a possibility that one of their 2 fatalities might have been contacted by one of our apparatus at an unknown point during the incident.
I will say this. It was very, very hectic,
very emergency mode at the crash site minutes after the airplane came to rest, and there was smoke and inhalation, and people were coming out of the fuselage as fast as they could. And I think people had to literally jump out of the other side of the airplane. So there's just a lot of confusion.
One of the girls, either Ye Mianhuan or Wang Lingjia, appears to have been killed during the crash. But the coroner says what's not clear, whether the emergency vehicle caused the death of the other girl or it struck her after she had already died. The coroner's autopsy results have not yet been made public. The news adds to the heartbreak of the children of Jiangxian Middle School in China, mourning the deaths of their classmates. Ye Menghuan loved music. Wang Lingjia always had a smile on her face. Parents say the elite school has been sending students to the U.S. for years.
As a father, I feel very sad. I saw those girls when we were saying goodbye.
The NTSB says the girls' cause of death is a key part of their investigation.
It is a very serious issue, and we want to understand it. We are reviewing video, airport surveillance video, to understand also what happened. And I will tell you, at least the initial read of the video by our investigators, they shared with me that it wasn't conclusive.
Now, these girls, of course, were on a school trip, Kyung. What about their fellow students? And what about these girls? You know, I had seen speculation that because of the one-child policy, they would have been their parents' only children.
Yeah, we don't know if they were their only children. What we do know is that that is generally the policy in China. So you can, at this point, assume that these parents did probably lose their only child because of China's policy. As far as their other students, there are about 25 of them here, Aaron. And what the Consul General is telling us is that they are extremely emotional. They're having a very hard time coping with this, on top of the fact that they lost everything. They've got to get passports and basic stuff like clothing and shoes. Aaron.
All right, Kyung Hwa, thank you very much.